Welcome back to the channel, everyone. I'm joined by Bas van Os and Charlie Brown, aka Stephan. Good to see you both. I want to start with what Stephan remembered my father saying about what is it, sickness, because you just had some, what is it, pneumonia? Am I saying it
Yeah,
correctly?
yeah, that was just the last episode of several sick episodes during the last 6 weeks. So,
Yeah.
and what preceded that was not just the festival, but some intense situations at my workplace
Mhm.
where I realized that I'm just might be in the wrong spot. Or let's say there's an old model in political science by Wildavsky for how do members of political parties behave if they do not agree with the main line of the party. And there are two principal options. One is voice, and the other one is exit. And I've been voicing for the last 12 months without any avail.
Yeah.
And so there comes a point when you realize that maybe you've said enough and maybe you should
Mm.
get on moving instead. And so I realized that I was pretty fed up. And what happened was I got the stomach flu, which
Mm.
is which immediately made me realize that there's a connection between what I experience in the workplace and the way the illness presents itself.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a immediate causal relationship with that, but I found that connection pretty meaningful. And then I was recovering and we went on holiday and I picked up a pneumonia, which is an inflammation of the respiratory system. And so that made me think, okay, I had been voicing so much uh, my concerns at my job place without actually getting any resonance. And that felt immediately correct as well. I wasn't surprised that that I got the
Makes sense.
pneumonia. Um, and so it feels deeply meaningful, even though I wouldn't necessarily say that, just because I felt that way, that sickness turned out that way, or vice versa. But the whole sum of the experience made me feel that it was actually useful for me, not just some kind of illness and forget it as soon as it's gone, but basically question myself as to, okay, what is the core of the problem? And so interestingly, I already felt that after the Breakwater Festival, and I talked about that as well with Ferdi while I was
Mhm.
staying over at his place, and he had some brilliant insights and was a wonderful conversation partner. And so when I got back, actually, I applied for a new job within the same organization, but at a different internal department. And so I'm still waiting for the return of that application and the process of that. But I know that we are a big department that takes a lot of time, and it's summer break, and
Mm.
there's personnel shortage in the HR department all the time. So that's not really a surprise. But
We have a lot of
now
shortage in the organization. Why? Because HR department is understaffed. Yeah.
it's hugely understaffed.
Yeah. So you can't don't even have the staff in the HR department to solve the
Right,
holes in
right.
the rest of the organization.
They are trying to sort those right now, but they are on work overload
Oh
since the
yeah, yeah,
beginning of
yeah.
the year, and so it's not no blame on them. They're doing the best they can. It's just yeah, it feels like in the German Democratic Republic, everyone is waiting for one banana that might come up all every two years or so. Um, and so I've talked things through with my wife as well, and we organized ourselves in a way to say, okay, by the end of the year, we know the trajectory,
Yeah.
and there will be changes either way, um, even if I stay at the same place. So there are some options there.
Good.
And so it felt like everything was aligning itself after the festival in a way that was very meaningful and made complete sense to me, even though I was sick four of the last 6 weeks,
Mm.
Mhm.
which is quite an intense experience as well.
especially in summer.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's rough. And
And
so,
with little kids.
yeah,
Yeah, of which one now is sick as well. So that was the reason I'm 5 minutes late. I had to get my feverish daughter into bed and
oh,
hope she's recovering soon.
yeah, me too. And so, Bas, you said that sickness is a misalignment of the soul.
I may have said something like that, but as I said, during the festival we were touching grass, so I may have been stoned
Yes.
when I said that. So I'm a bit careful there, but I may have said something like that. Yeah. How did you take that?
Um, I recall it was during the break after your talk, I think it was. And we had a coffee break, and I was talking with Diego, and we were also talking about sickness and that kind of stuff. And you interjected with a sense of you had experience with coaching with people that were in a very bad situation and had health issues, of which it
So
turned
that
out that after they were able to realign their behavior and their goals to the desires of their soul, those sicknesses didn't necessarily disappear, but they kind of were mitigated by that.
well, some miraculous things have happened actually.
Yeah.
So yeah, I must warn a little bit. When I use the word soul, it's in a more restrictive way, like in the Psalms.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
most people, when they use the word soul, it's like some very special celestial part of them that carries their
Right. Yeah.
essence.
Yeah.
So you want to
So
elaborate on this notion of the soul in the Psalms?
Yeah, well, I think it's beautiful in the Psalms that the soul is singing, is elated, is depressed. It's very much your emotional system.
Hmm.
And it's interesting that when you speak with your soul, it's difficult to actually understand what she is saying to you. And she might be your inner child, as we say, because these are all these patterns that are laid up that actually govern our behaviors. But she is, I'm using the word she here because both in Greek and in Hebrew, I would rather use the female gender for soul. And it's interesting because we think our essence is the way that we think and that we talk and that we process. And if you would call your soul your essence, that it's something that is not very apt at verbalizing. It's not very rational. It's not very able to process, and it's more like something that can drive you forward. That's also pre-Socratic idea in Greek thinking about the soul. It can drive you forward, and it can give you appetite. It's your dopamine system or what have you. I mean, it cannot do all of that for you, um, uh, but. But we think we are in our mind. We think we are in our head. We think that that is where the I is. So, oh, my soul, why are you roaring against me? Is what Psalm 42 and 43 say. And roaring is the same word for a lion, as I said at the festival. So it's really, we don't understand ourselves. And that is such a fundamental notion that I think was only picked up later on with Freud and Jung. And it came back again. But it's very biblical that you cannot really understand such a big part of yourself.
And so when the soul is misaligned, I'm picturing like an inner child being upset, you know what I mean? How do
Yeah.
you see that?
Well, let me give you a few examples. Normally, we have if we are very conscientious, our mind wants to govern what we do.
Yeah.
Huh? So we say we have to go to work, even though you feel sick or you feel sad. You don't give it attention. And your mind forces, that's discipline. You're good at discipline, Lucas. And there's a risk in that. It's a big benefit. But your grandfather, one of your grandfathers, he was unhappy at his workplace. And that lasted for a very long time. And he was very conscientious, so he would go there anyway. And at one point in time, he couldn't walk anymore. all kinds of tests. Nothing was found. He was sick. He couldn't walk. His body basically said, "I'm not bringing you there anymore." And then when he reached the age of early retirement, miraculously, he could walk again. Because the guilt of not going to your work when you should be going was lifted. Another young fellow, you know him, a young fellow who was in a job situation, was promoted manager, etc., but went very fast. And he was getting anxiety attacks. And at one point, it was getting so strong that he would open the door of his car and vomit outside of his car. His body was basically telling him, no, you're not supposed to go there. Because your spirit can be so strong, but it can also be very unwise.
I understand. I want to come back to this and to body and spirit as well, because you had a question about that I thought was worth exploring. But before we do that, I'd actually be interested from Stephan's point of view as well, how you experienced the festival, because I wasn't there. I got to listen back to a bit. But yeah, you said it left a mark on you in some way. So
the first impression that I had was how absolutely appropriate the decision was to keep it offline. That made the difference compared to the festivals before that, because the eye of the observer is absent of a third observer. It's like you break down the fourth wall and there's no other observer in the room. It's just those people right there. And that is of immense importance, especially given all the non-verbal signaling that's taking place, the motions and the sounds, and the touch. I mean, that touching grass was basically also, putting your hand on the shoulder of someone saying something deeply meaningful to them, or hugging each other. It's like that was so relinquishing, compared to all the online conversations taking place. And so I was thinking about that as well when listening to your thoughts about podcasting and getting, being financed by the podcasting. Is that something you should do or not? And I thought, like, well, the technology itself means that we cannot have the full human experience. Having to use that technology is already the cyborgization of humanity. And so if you want to have the most meaningful conversations, it's obvious that you have to have as little technology as possible to be able to have that meaningful conversation. Now, that doesn't mean that if someone is hearing impaired, he cannot use his hearing aids. That still is cyborgization in a sense, but that is a necessary predicament for having the conversation in the first place. But I thought about what would I do when I had with my best friends, and usually I call them directly, or I text them and then we call, or we have a to and fro with text messaging. But already this format with Zoom, what it needs is a first conversation about when and how we actually get together and how to make things happen. And so that's already a step apart. So if someone is in a bad place right now, my best friend around the corner, whatever, he either shows up in front of my door, or he gives me a text message, or he calls. And so you have an immediacy there that you don't have with any Zoom conversation or even StreamYard, because you first have to share the StreamYard link and someone has to click on it and you have to enter the room and then you have to get the technology working. So the mic is set up properly, and that already is such a high bar for meaningful conversations, because it's not as spontaneous as the conversations that were taking place at Bas's place right during the breaks. Someone says one sentence to you and immediately a universe opens up and you're full into the meaningful conversation. So there's no hurdle to jump over. And with this technology, it feels like always there's this hurdle that you have to jump over. And so I felt that it was extremely easy to get into astonishing conversations with the people during the festival. It was very intimate. Um, it was not in any way esoteric or spiritual or anything in that direction, what critics were commenting on already before the festival took place in some of the PVK videos. They were like, okay, touching grass, that's new paganism, that kind of stuff. And I was there, I can attest to it. No, nothing is farther from the truth. Um, and in the first place, it was just really humble, kind, and calm uh, people that were extremely open to listening. So maybe this little corner is, and that's what PVK was talking about in one of his last videos, is like maybe this little corner is helping us learning to love others as we love ourselves. And that is best possible when you are in real life with no technology involved and you have the people directly in front of you. And this is what the festival, I think, facilitated in the best way possible.
And yet we are here again.
Yeah, well, I spoke about the Zoom thing in the video I made yesterday, where in a way it's like it's even further from that pure connection, but also it's allowing so many people to, you know, access something real through it. So just like any other tool, it can give you a lot, but it can also turn into this copy of a copy and a substitute that
Yeah,
that you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
and that's the tension that I think we have to work with. And like that's why I often emphasize that I do one conversation in the week, but for that there's like a dozen others that are offline and that are working on a community and building towards something very real. um,
I think that is one thing that the one thing that has, I really learned from John Vivek is the importance of being able to keep the tension,
mm,
not trying to resolve everything to one of the poles. And so you could either say we throw the baby out with the bathwater and get rid of all the Zoom technology and all the podcasting, that kind of stuff, but that would go too far. But on the other hand, doing that for purely financial reasons is also a bad idea.
yeah,
And so you're always in this constant tension. And in a sense, that's been the case with all technology created, especially with media. And I think Marshall McLuhan can say a lot to that, from Gutenberg to television. And now with internet, it's actually going backwards. One of the first technologies that was available in the early 2000s for personal distribution or publishing was YouTube. And then later on, the podcasting picked up. And then you have Substack. So it's kind of an inversion of the, Gutenberg press, and then you have television,
yeah,
and then
yeah.
you have radio, and then you have television, and now it's kind of, the opposite direction.
It's funny. That's true.
This morning, and that it actually that's yeah, and that makes it difficult to sort of be in the conversation if you're not actively financially contributing to all these payables. So I think we should. I think some things are really worth money, and there's no problem in doing that. I think the university courses that Peterson is setting up might be interesting. I don't know. But I think in order to follow the conversation, it should be like a marketplace or like a cafe where you can just walk in and where there should be as little as possible
Yeah,
hindrances to participation.
I completely agree. Yeah, that's why I feel a bit on the fence about this, paying to get into a deeper to a closer group or something, or it's I think the reason this little corner is so pure is that it's like a zero cost barrier um, to participate in, but yet still it remains intimate somehow. And I think being able to do that is like so special and meaningful because it means it's radically open. To be radically open and radically intimate, that's like, yeah, that's almost, Christ-like. I
I mean,
think
in a
that's
sense,
beautiful.
participating in the festival convicted me of the fact that if it's already so easy and so low bar to have deeply meaningful conversations with kind of strangers during a festival, then why the heck am I not able to recreate that in front of my house?
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful thought.
And what does that say about me?
Mm,
And so that's kind of the homework that I took back to my place. And I've been thinking about that ever since. Like, okay, well, clean up your room basically when it comes to relationships. Do the same stuff with
yeah,
your family, with your friends, with your neighbors. But it needed the detour of going online, taking me offline to a festival to come back home with that message that convicted me of my own defaults.
I,
And so I think, I mean, my personal journey, it involved the technology, and I needed
yeah,
that route.
I think that's
But
very analogous. Go ahead.
sorry, wasn't that technology also a way into a bubble of like-minded people who talked about the same subjects? So sort of the threshold was lowered for you through that technology. And then as you did that, you discovered in this little corner that the rando conversations are actually as interesting and perhaps even more interesting than the big ideas. And then but if that's true, then I can do that at home as well. Because everybody is an interesting person. If you get to their story, if you really get to what they love, if they open up to you like their secrets, their insides, that is a moment of grace. And if you find out, but you first before that you had to learn to speak about things that motivated you to open up, which was a bubble. You needed a bubble to first get into it.
Yeah, I also needed the bubble to realize that I have much more prejudices towards the people that I really know well,
Mm,
and that actually increases the bar to jump over to
yeah,
have the
Mm,
meaningful conversation. Um,
yeah,
and to actually reduce those prejudices and say, cut the crap, start over.
yeah,
yeah,
Don't go into that conversation believing that you know what they will say because you know how they react and whatever. It's no, we have to get back to zero,
mm.
basically.
mm, yeah. I think that's important. Yeah.
Yeah. I still walk that tension as well every day. I think that's really of prime importance. Like I have a lot of situations in which maybe I get frustrated by something or someone, and then I'm really thinking like, well, there's also deep potential in the interaction with this situation in terms of you can learn and grow from it, and you can get to know a beautiful person who is undeniably there as well. And then I really think like, okay, I started with this practice recently. John has been talking about IFS a lot, internal family system. So I did one of those meditation practices, and one of them is like you going into a room with a person that triggers you, but you're not allowed to take the part of you that gets triggered. And so that turns into a really fun situation. Uh, so yeah, I don't know if you spoke just now, but I think your microphone is off.
No, no,
Okay.
I can recall several situations in the last weeks where I was in conversations where I was not able to keep that person
Give the
away.
part out.
Yeah, right. So some people were triggering me the last weeks,
Mm,
pretty much. Yeah.
yeah, I understand. I was gonna say the what you described about needing the technology to to bring it home in some sense. I think that's similar to a lot of people's journeys with faith as well. To need this crazy Canadian guy to tell you the importance of the Bible, and then to have this whole intellectual relationship with it, and then to realize, oh, it's actually participation that I have to do.
Yeah.
I actually have to. I can actually make it at home as well. And then what you said about cleaning your room. One thing Peterson also says is make your home beautiful.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and that's, I think, the task now for a lot of people. And I think it's really, for me, it's very exciting. Like I'm really looking at the place where I live, like, oh, this is like a potential paradise, you know, where you have community and you have people that you know, and getting to know neighbors better and stuff. And it's like, oh, it's all right here, but it's the relationships that I'm a part of that I can make better, uh, that can then make my life into this idyllic thing that I thought was impossible, when I had
And
more
so
of a
many times,
suspicious. Go ahead.
so many times it's not us actively trying to bring something into reality, but God putting us into situations that we did not expect, that turn out to be a Kairos moment. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
always thinking about how much agency do we actually have, and how much agency does God give us? And I'm quite hesitant to always talk about me doing something and bringing something forward or creating something, because that puts me up front again. While my personal experience is that many times I was only able to realize in hindsight that God put me there for some reason, and I believed that I was doing it by my own cause, but that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
And so right now, what we experienced, we had a wonderful holiday with my family, and then we got back, and a friend of ours, she's mid-40s, two kids, and she's been diagnosed with a severe lung cancer. And that just dropped right into our place. And my wife basically said, okay, this is our task now. We got to make a home for them and be able to, give them some retreat and whatever. And this, if that is what we need to do now, then that's our calling. And that's what mostly the most meaningful situations actually are. Because that's really it really is a tough thing to talk about with your wife, but also how do you set yourself in front of people that are being diagnosed with something like that? And how do you behave in situations like that? And that makes you think like, okay, this is where meaning comes from.
Yeah.
And so strangely enough, it's not just your own suffering, but also openly engaging in the suffering of others, trying to keep as normal as possible, not making a fuss of it, but just being there in the moment.
It's
And so
interesting
that
what you're
means
saying.
what you said about the soul, which made me think of the left-right distinction of the hemispheres, um, kicking out the rationalizing left brain behavior, trying to make sense of everything and arguing everything and making propositions and diagnoses and that kind of stuff. And instead, trusting more that intuitive movements, that dance of the soul that knows pretty well what the others need if you're willing to listen.
Mm.
Yeah.
And not just, listen to your own propositional thinking and say, I'm smart enough to actually tackle this question right now. No, that's not how it works.
That it's so persuasive, that voice sometimes. I feel like. But yeah, the answer is often in front of you. Like in hindsight, I find that a lot of things seem so obvious. But you were speaking about how it's obvious that God put you there. I also think about how situations seem so much more clear when you look back on them. And then what it takes to in the moment be aware of that is a lot of humility, I think. And for me, praying about it and talking about it with people.
Yeah.
And it seems really, you know, simple, but often very difficult.
I wonder where anxiety is situated, because my personal experience with anxiety is that it's always been the rationalizing propositional terror of the left brain that's caused me the most intense anxiety.
Well,
Where
you make a good point there. it's if we are blessed with a brain that can think. So moving from a reptile to a social mammal and then to a human being gives us a brain that can think. But if our soul part, if I may use that word, if our nefesh, let's use the Hebrew word, if that one is not only afraid, but actually takes over our thinking. So our thinking becomes driven by the fear that is in our emotional system. Then our thinking becomes subjective, and it's no longer a pacifier, but rather one that is running on steroids. So anxiety basically means that your thoughts are being governed by the fact that you hear your heartbeat, that you feel that your throat is contracting, etc. That you feel you start sweating, etc. So all these emotional and bodily experiences then tell your mind something is really wrong, and it overreacts because it is this mind. So it can think, well, maybe I have got this illness, or maybe this is happening, or my kid is dying, or my house is on fire, etc. So there's a very interesting interaction, and in this case, misfunctioning of the brain.
Yeah. It's a funny relationship to the body as well, that you start to become really aware of all these things. Because I got this tip for like public speaking, that if you feel really nervous, don't do a breathing exercise and listen to your breath. Actually do the opposite. Try to go into other people's experience, like focus outwardly. Um, but I wonder
Yeah.
what that relationship is with the body, that you start to be aware of that.
Well, the body is built to fight, to flee, to freeze, etc. Huh? So the body is built to do that. So it gives certain signals. But our brain also produces these situations. So if I'm in a movie that's very active, I come out and my body is all active. So all these things that happened in my brain are also working through my soul and working through my body, through my flesh. And that means that I can get into a loop. So my brain can produce thoughts that are anxiety producing, then my body can react with a heartbeat or adrenaline, etc., that says, "Oh, something is really going on." And then my feeling system, my emotional system, can say, "Well, I'm really afraid," and then my mind can say, "Oh, but this could happen," and then I can get into this loop of things that are producing anxiety.
And if you apply certain techniques, you always run the risk of the internal critic that says, oh, if I just apply that technique correctly, I get rid of my anxiety. And oh, I'm not using it correctly. And that makes you even more anxious than the initial anxiety. So
Yeah.
there's a kind of negative feedback taking place there.
Yeah.
And
Yes,
what you said there
yeah.
with going outward, looking at the situation of the others, of the experience of the others, that's exactly what Peterson means when he says thinking about yourself is basically the same as being depressive. It's like that's how you begin becoming depressive.
Yeah.
If you start reading constantly about the self, I mean, you could get into the question of what the self actually is. And I've come to
Well,
realize
yes,
that
but
it's
if
much
you're
more
in the
fleeting.
but it's if you're in the downward loop.
Yeah.
You can also go in the upward loop, and
Yeah.
then thinking about yourself can be a beautiful task of making the most beautiful Stephan that is available. Carving out Aaron asked my attention for a beautiful text in Plotinus, where you can think of yourself as a work of art, but it
Mm.
just doesn't look like that. I mean, you're a rough rock, and it still needs to be carved out, but you can already love that rock for what it contains and what it could be.
Yeah.
So I think
There's a
there's a
diamond in there
positive and a
somewhere.
negative. That's exactly, there's a positive spiral and there's a negative spiral,
Yeah.
and we need to. And the negative spiral is not helped by focusing on yourself. I completely agree with that, Lucas, because it's a negative already.
Yeah. Shall we talk about what you wanted to propose about the relationship between spirit, body, and soul to truth, beauty, and goodness?
Well, you already touched on it a little bit.
Okay.
Because you said I wanted to do beautiful podcasting rather than driven by money or what have you. And I've learned so much from Viveki on that. And I see in the little corner more and more people using sort of shorthand for God, or something that's not that threatening, is to talk about the truth. What is true, what is beautiful, what
That's
is
a
good.
funny
So
dimension
that's
to this, indeed.
very nice.
Yeah.
So you can have, because if you combine the two, you've got the one, and the one is God, and that's Neoplatonic. So John must be happy about that. But I think it also comes from who we are. And I think one of his other concepts is acceptation. Remember that concept?
Yeah.
That something that was already developed in a reptile is reused in a mammal, is reused in a Homo sapiens. Now, Peterson once had an interview with someone who worked with his students to discover what is beautiful and that was attractive in a partner. And they found out that everything that people find beautiful is actually going back either to your health or your reproductive health or what have you. And then I can say the same about an apple. We have come to find beautiful what is good for our body. So we know that this is a healthy apple. So that's why we like it. So you come to appreciate the taste. Your taste is developed to eat what you need to eat. The horses won't eat certain herbs that are detrimental to their livers. They have evolved to find beautiful or tasteful whatever is good for their survival or reproduction. So the first level of creature that always also strives for beauty is not Homo sapiens or Lucas Vos doing his podcast. It's the reptile. It's the lower level animals that have learned that beauty is something that is positive for reproduction and for survival. And then when we move into social animals, we find out that we are stronger if we are also a team, if we are also cooperating, if we are raising our offspring together, etc. So we find out that certain things are good. And if they are good, then we also find them beautiful. So it's sort of an acceptation of the sentiments of the neurological pathways that were used when developing a sense for beauty are reused by social mammals for things that are good. So the good is also beautiful. And beauty, if it's not good, we get confused. Hey, it seems like a good apple. It seems like a beautiful woman, but maybe I am already married and I already have kids, so maybe I should not. And then the beauty is less beautiful. So it's not as beautiful anymore to engage with that woman because it would break up my own situation at home and the kids that I'm raising. And then when we move into Homo sapiens, I think we're reusing those elements, but then it gets to truth. And what is truth other than being part of the faculty, and that's what I call spirit, of being able to move through time and space, even if we're not there. So let's think about this a little bit. We can imagine situations, or we can imagine potential futures, and we can evaluate those with our system. We feel happy about it. Oh, there's a future I would want to move to. And truth is basically that the idea correlates with reality, or that we find the idea behind the reality, the eureka moment. That is the moment of experiencing truth. Like truth is, okay, this is in my head, like a statement in language, and it is the same in reality. Oh, that's a true statement. But it's going beyond that. It's basically, I had this idea and it works. I was thinking of God and I see Jesus and he is the truth, because in the Son we recognize the Father. So it's the pattern recognition, and then you're in the symbolic world, and then you're at Peugeot. And I think that once we are sapiens, and if we are truly healthy humans, if everything is aligned, if our flesh, our soul, and our spirit are aligned, then we cannot find something beautiful anymore if it's not also true.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
So this is how these transcendentals work together, and they reflect exactly how we have evolved. And I think it's a marvelous thing that our spirit and our soul and our body all work together to find things that are beautiful, good, and true, if we are healthy, if we are aligned. And that's what we started with misalignment of the three, and then we get sick.
So you're saying that when you're aligned, you cannot see anything as beautiful that's not true or good. Is that what you said?
Yes, because our eros works good. It's good that our eros works, but not every type
needs
of
to be in service.
Erotic endeavor is also good for us.
Yes.
And once we have found out that that's not good because I'm hurting my wife, I should not be pursuing this. Okay, but now we also go, yes, but I also want to create a family. I want to be a good dad. I want to be a good granddad. I want them to flourish later on. So the pattern must be good. And the pattern must be beautiful. So that's why I thought it was so good to sort of understand how these three transcendentals, even though they were sort of sifted out in history over time, but they're very nice ways of looking at who we are in that trinity of the human being.
And you related this as well to the Trinity itself.
When I was, I think 19 or 20, when I made those drawings from the Psalms 42, 43, I thought I cannot say anything about God that is beyond us. We don't have the experience or the language to talk about God. We need earthly examples. Jesus is an earthly example of how you could talk about God. But we cannot talk about God. God in the Neoplatonic tradition, but also already with Irenaeus, is the immeasurable, and we are measured. So we are confined, restricted. We are part of this reality, and that other reality, we don't have anything. But we have language, and language is symbolic, and it may open up some ways of thinking about that. So then I thought maybe I cannot understand the Trinity. I think there's a Unitarian in the box when PVK is talking about things, and I respect that, because I think God is one, and there's no way that we can talk about God. But I think that God opens up to us in our body, soul, and spirit. And I think that opening up to us as a creator, as our brother, Jesus, as the spirit within us, is a Trinitarian experience.
Does it all happen at the same time? Is it so the body, soul, and the spirit, it can experience God? Does that happen in alignment?
Depends on whether or not you're healthy.
So if you're not healthy, let's say, would there be a situation in which you experience God through one of those?
Yeah, and it can be a demon.
How so?
Let me give you an example. Suppose that your mind is, say, I have to love God completely. I have to only love God. I have to hate my body, and I have to take a whip and control my flesh. My flesh has become my enemy of my true self. My true self loves God, and my flesh has become my enemy. So I need to hate the fact that I have an erotic drive. And in the end, I'm a pastor and I rape little kids. So that's a demon that takes over. So I have a genuine longing for God, for truth, for the highest good, for the highest. I have that, but I don't allow myself to be fully human, fully incarnated, flesh, soul, spirit, in the face of God. I hate part of me, and that hate can poison me.
But we are speaking about a longing for, so not necessarily an experience of God. Is that what you're saying as well? Because
Well, it's interesting. The dopamine effect, that's one of the things that Peterson was talking about. The dopamine effect is maximum when going toward the goal. When actually reaching the goal, it's already lower. So you move towards the apple, that's beautiful. As a little monkey, you move towards the apple, it's beautiful, it's beautiful, it's beautiful. I'm getting the apple. Okay, no, I'm going to eat it.
you got an apple.
I got an apple. But the whole experience of longing for, we are beings of desire for beauty, goodness, and truth. And that's how we were meant to be, that we desire upward, that we desire towards those elements. And it's in that desiring and moving towards, that's very important. If you're not moving toward, then it doesn't work anymore. So it's in it moving toward that you experience the drawing. It's like some people said, okay, how can we imagine God if God is Aristotle's unmoved mover? Well, still the sun draws the plants to it, draws the growth towards it. And even if we take a Neoplatonic view of God, which is, I would say, very much more detached than a biblical view of God, but even if you take that one, then you experience God in the being drawn. He is the unmoved mover in that case. And I think that is an experience of God. Yes.
That actually makes a lot of sense. And if you would experience him, would probably be too much or false. You know what I mean?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well,
Expand a bit.
the idea that if you would actually experience God, that we are in this incarnation at least not capable of experiencing that. That's what I think.
Yes.
At least I think that's a necessary part of us.
They
Right?
were. Yeah. Yeah. It's acknowledging our limitedness, our being part of this reality that makes us a bit humbler and less prone to grandiose thoughts and misappropriating religion and using it for wrong things, like I just described in the example.
Do you feel like the Neoplatonic view of God is too mystical for you?
No.
No?
No.
Because I don't know, there's something DC Schindler spoke about. It's like when we mystify God too much, um, something like morality becomes more ambiguous as well. Like the concrete.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but that's why the incarnation is there. So it is Jesus became like us so that we become like him. We can never mystify God too much. But we need the incarnation, so we can never see God enough incarnated in our lives. Then it gets stronger. If it's again, that's what you said about the two poles that have to work together, and you should work with that tension. That's very, very Christian to really say, okay, he became like us, weak, sick, etc. So we would become like him, eternal, part of that other realm, part of who God is at the same time. That's why I loved your talk about heaven that you clipped and that you put on your website or on your channel yesterday, I think. It is this simultaneous movement of the incarnation and the deification or the mystification or what have you.
So do you struggle then with notions of a God that is not incarnated? Because I know you're not like closed off to Eastern ideas. With that, I'm saying Vedic, for example, Vedic understandings of God. Is that something you don't understand then, or like reject, or how do you look at that?
You cannot reject something that you're not enough familiar with. I think
Yeah,
I should caveat that first.
yeah.
Thinking about the subject of suffering, I'm very touched with what Stephan just said. He said, I feel meaning at the moment that we know that this friend of ours, get this diagnosis and we make a place, a home for her. And I feel connected in her suffering. Now, we know that the problem in many Eastern religion is the problem of suffering and the idea how to get away from suffering. And I don't know much about Eastern traditions, but I do know that in Stoicism, part of it is training your emotions, that your emotions don't feel that much suffering anymore. And that's good if you want to avoid the loop of anxiety. So there's positive benefit of that Stoicism. But there is also a risk that you would not connect to people who are suffering, that you would not engage with the suffering, that you would not allow yourself to suffer. And I think that you're losing a lot of your human potential, but even your divine potential, if you're not participant in that suffering of others, because there's so much beauty and healing and meaning to be gained from that. Sorry, I'm
No,
sort of taking too much time now.
no, it's good. It's good. I'm thinking about suffering as a good thing in that case. And
Yes.
yeah, that's difficult for me to understand, I guess, because I think it's also an Eastern idea that suffering is when you have discomfort and then you resist the discomfort. Um, so it's this idea that it's in your power to suffer to a degree.
Mm-hmm. And it's good as long as it keeps you from getting the negative loop. And it's bad if it holds you back from committing to someone in order because you don't want to get hurt, or
Yeah, okay.
if it's
Yes.
so
Yes.
many places where it goes wrong.
Yes.
So there's a positive to it and there's a negative to it. And I think, again, in the tension, you need to solve it. So we need the mystification as much as that we need the incarnation.
Yeah, that's a nice tension actually to uphold. And then when you reject the suffering and therefore the relationships suffer from that rejection, you have a wrong hierarchy of values, let's say. Yeah, that's beautiful. Stephan, do you have anything to respond to thus far? You've been a quiet listener.
Well, if Bas was a book, I would be rereading the whole paragraph again and again and again, making side notes because I think he said so many profound things in just a
Yeah,
few minutes,
yeah,
which is really mind-boggling. And so I will have to re-listen and re-listen to it to actually, come to the depth of all that. So thanks very much for that. Um, what came to my mind initially was um, that with the advent of media, you said that we have a soul that is able to be in contact with both the past and the future, to set yourself into a future that is non-existent yet. And so what happens with media is that you have this combinatorial explosiveness because it's not just your own past and your own future, but with the printing press, it's the past of all humanity.
Mm-hmm.
With the telegraph and radio and television, it's the present of all humanity. And so that is already anxiety producing, intensely anxiety producing, which
It's
makes
also
it
the
even
definition of God.
right, right. So we become anxious when we try to become God. That's basically the message behind that, right? Um, and so basically this the right alignment is knowing that you are in a sea of past and a sea of future, but that doesn't mean that it foreshadows your own past or it foreshadows your own future. It's again this paradox of being able to keep that tension, being afloat in the river, um, using your body to move, and not giving in or giving up to the tensions that occur because of the motions of the sea waves and of the river.
Wow, that's beautiful. Yeah, yeah.
So it's basically
How important is the body for you, Stephan?
um, so important that thinking about faith and religion made me realize that I only trust Christ because of his embodiment,
Hmm.
not although of his embodiment.
Yes. Yeah.
And I've experienced that close hand because my father turned kind of esoteric Eastern religion philosophy associated. Um, sending me birthday greetings like "May the universe bless you with all the best" and that kind of stuff. And in the past, he was also kind of, yeah, suffering is just, you have to realign your thinking about suffering and then it goes away. And I was like, no, 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 wait. I've gone through intense phases of physical and psychological suffering, and I felt that the only faith that took that suffering serious was Christianity, because it put suffering on the cross directly for everyone to see.
Yeah.
And so that made me realize that the embodiment, incarnation, is hugely important to me. And when I found out that Nefesh is basically this intense soul-body connection that is not a dualism, but is a unity in itself.
Yeah.
That made me feel like home. I was like, okay, that's it. That's my
Wow.
phenomenological experience of my own life. That makes so much sense because I couldn't come to terms with all this, yeah, the soul and the body, and so your body is suffering, but your soul is still, in a good place. And I was like, no, actually, my soul is crying. My soul is yearning. My
Yeah.
soul is weeping. My
Yeah.
soul is being hurt.
Yeah.
And then, but also at the same time there was always this kind of hopeful voice in the background, which is what the Psalms are writing. And that made me realize, okay, I don't have to think about that any longer. If I'm in such a situation in my life, I just turn to the Psalms again.
Yeah.
Listen to Psalm 42 and 43 and makes you realize everything that needs to be said about the human psyche and the human anthropology, it's right there. It's right there in front of us. And it's even in the most beautiful poetic language possible. So both the message and the medium transport the true, the good, and the beautiful all at the same time, which is
Wow.
just
Yeah.
so astonishing for a text that is so old. And it makes you realize I'm this small, and just this one psalm is like that's the universe, and I'm able to partake in that. And so embodiment is for me, I can't underestimate the importance of embodiment for my
Wow.
personal life experience and for the way I try to. I'm kind of this physical guy. I like to hug people. I like to, and I'm always like, okay, maybe it's too much, but it's without that, I don't have connection to the true, the good, and the beautiful. And there's a real risk associated with that as well. And you talked about that, Bas, that you can misunderstand that for eros, or you can misinterpret that eros. And there's a risk in that. And I'm very well aware of that, which is why I got married at the age of 23.
Wow.
Because I was at university and everyone was saying, yeah, look, there's so many beautiful girls around here. What about it? And I was like, that was probably my soul telling me, bind yourself, because otherwise you are in serious misalignment and that will get you into even more trouble. And so one of my colleagues at university asked me, why are you getting married at such an early age? And I said to her, because I fear that otherwise I might mess things up. And she said, that's not very romantic. And I said, oh, well, I think it actually is. It really is romantic. Yeah, so and it
Mm.
comes probably also in part from having been misaligned to my body. When my parents broke up, me being in identity crisis with my own sexual identity because of the coming out of my father, and all the thinking going through that, and then what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a husband? What does it mean to be a father? um what does it mean to be man and woman? How is that related to each other? What does it say about me? Who am I actually? That was, I mean, of course, that's in puberty and adolescence. That's the normal questions everyone goes through. But for me, it was like amped up to a maximum degree possible. It's like if someone put the usual adolescence signal into an amplifier and tuned it up to the maximum and said, "This is your signal." Try try to come to terms with that. And it took
And
me,
it was
it took
very
me,
much related to your family history, huh? That
yeah,
your father and
yeah,
mother, um, yeah, I don't want to say anything that, but it's related to your family history. Then, and you as someone in puberty needed to deal with all that.
yeah.
23. Lucas, how old are you?
22.
I beat you to it, Stephan.
Always been a competitive person, so
He beat me to it. I was 23.
yeah,
Oh,
that's
wow.
actually surprising. I always have this picture in my head that he got married at 17.
Well, truth be told, he still looks like your brother, not
Yes.
like your father. So that might be one reason.
Camera's kind to us.
Oh.
No, but Aaron's up next. I'm really excited for that. I saw them yesterday. They are glowing. So that will be very exciting. But yeah, I recognize a lot of what you're saying. Also, the binding to me. Sometimes people ask me what marriage means to me, and I'm like, it's a freedom,
Yeah.
in a similar sense that discipline is my freedom. It's like this actually allows me to be aligned and to be centered, and you know, it's the order and the chaos for me that actually couldn't imagine more depth in relationship than this path. So I'm happy to
Yeah.
share that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My personal experience, and I'm not as long married as Bas is, but I think he can agree, is that marriage between man and woman at a certain point becomes the it's basically the microcosm of the macrocosm.
Hmm.
Within that marriage, everything is encompassed that also takes place outside of marriage.
Mm.
And understanding your own relationship to your wife, understanding yourself within that relationship, understanding the male and the female, the chaos and the order, all those polarities makes you understand reality in a much more profound sense than if you were just by yourself.
I would add the Trinity to that. Why? Because it's Isis, Osiris, and Horus. It's so Pythagoras, of course, said all creation is built out of triangles,
Hmm.
and the idea that it's a polarity, it's a dualism, is not productive enough, not creative enough.
Yeah,
Once you add the third to
I see
it,
what you mean.
it becomes a dance instead of struggle. It becomes a reproduction. It becomes a universe.
Yeah,
So I
we
think
felt incomplete until we had our first child.
yes, yes.
And that is kind of okay, you realize that this duality of man and woman is a um, volatile balance, as with every stool. The stable stool has three legs. Doesn't have
Yeah.
four, doesn't have two, it has three. And so that stability was only afforded to us after we agreed to go forward with having children.
There's something magical in this. So I'm not a Unitarian. I bash Unitarians. I'm not a Unitarian myself in the sense that um, I'm only that in respect that it's beyond our reality to think of God. So beyond our reality, God is one. But the way that I experience Him in my reality, I think this magic number of three works because it makes us relational beings and it makes us generational beings. So there's so much more as soon as you, as a human being, step away from the one to becoming the three, if I
Yeah.
may.
Is the third in between in reality? And also when we spoke about the couple, when I'm thinking of the third, I'm actually thinking of the unity that comes out of the duality of the couple, let's say.
It's the fruit of the duality.
Yeah.
But those two already are actually three if you think about love as being the lover, the loved one, and the love between
The
them.
love,
So
it's
the
yeah.
love mediates between the lover and the loved. And so the
Mm-hmm.
loved one returns the love to the lover, but only through the medium of love. So there's already
Yeah.
three essences involved, basically, even if you just talk about man and woman. And that is kind of,
But that love is potential, and that's
yeah,
a potential, and then it gets incarnated in the offspring. Now, of course, this is all symbolic language. Huh? I mean, some people have 0 kids, some people have 6. That happens. so, so you lose the Trinity at one point in your life. But that's I think the symbolic value, especially also when we talk about men and women, because the male and the female, we don't exclude other type of relationships, etc. from that. But it's the idea of being complementary in a way that can be reproductive, that can create new life. And if that's in a very traditional way, it works easily because then you can see it happening. So if you're not in that traditional way, you can still see it happening, but you need a little bit more imagination. But it's still the same principle: the fact that that you complement each other and that new life comes forth from that.
Yeah, I mean, being able to complement each other means that you are aware of. I'm not a Jungian, but I think that's quite appropriate terms. Like you have the anima and the animus, the female and the male side. And there needs to be some kind of integration and acceptance that. And I think that is also something beautiful you see in the Psalms. It's a song of David, and he speaks in a language and uses emotions that sounds very effeminate, which is on purpose. As you said, the soul is or the Lady Wisdom. It's like there's so much feminine aspects in the Old Testament.
Or the spirit or wisdom, Sophia,
Right, yeah.
is also feminine. So the funny
Exactly,
thing
right.
is that only flesh is called male.
Yeah, yeah.
And then both spirit and at least in Greek, of course, it's neutral. But in Hebrew, spirit is also female, ruach. Yeah. What I think you triggered me a little bit with Jung, because when you look to Jung, of course, he uses the word anima, but also animus, which is something he coined himself, of course. And it's not exactly the same. I think that Jung sort of looks at children as being both, having both feminine and masculine qualities. And growing up in his day and age when roles were very much gendered, the boy would sort of be told, don't do that, that's for girls. Don't cry, that's for girls. Don't play with dolls, that's for girls. That color is not for you. So he had sort of to store those desires in his unconscious. And so he created his anima over time as he grew up, because part of him was denied to him.
Yeah.
Was denied from his conscious.
Yeah.
And that sort of became an ideal. And then he met someone who completed him in the sense that part of him that was unconscious then is brought into the union, and there it gets its place. And that's why the girl builds up an animus. This is old-fashioned 50s, 60s, well, before 60s, but old-fashioned 50s gendered roles. So it's very strong in how Jung's thinking was, and it's very symbolic. I don't know if it works exactly the same in our generation still, because we have less of that way of raising our kids. But it's still a fascinating concept that his anima is basically that part of you that was denied to you as you grew up, and that is sort of revived in the relationship.
Yeah, this makes me a bit hesitant, and I might get into trouble for this saying that, but I think one of the problems we have today with conversation about gender in general is the assumption that everything is created by society. And basically, especially the liberal arts, throwing out anything that might resemble evolutionary psychology or biology out with the bathwater, and just saying, no, it's only the context that you grew up in and only the false behavior of your evil parents that made you this way. And I'm sorry to say, I don't buy that model. Because I can attest to my own personal experience with parents that have good and bad sides, and myself having very good and very bad sides, that something might be dependent on my upbringing, but a lot is character and behavior and even some genetics maybe. So it's a complex story, and I don't like the simplification of the people trying to tell me that it's all just a society that is not gender neutral enough that creates the space that makes the people behave the way they do. It doesn't make any sense to me. It only makes sense from a perspective, if you come to think of it, that it's an anti-modernist notion having been picked up through the centuries by Rousseau and then Jung and Freud and implement it into propaganda that everyone believes this. But from a rather, let's say, neutral standpoint, it doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't.
The essentialism doesn't make any sense.
Yes, right. Exactly. Yeah.
I think there's quite a bit of sense to it, except. Well, let me just, if will you allow me to just, because I don't want to be in a teacher's seat, but when I read stuff like that, and I think if gender would be a social construct, then there are not 2 genders or 14 or 100, but there are billions and billions. It's an explosion of possibilities, because every different social setting then creates a new concept of what it is to be a man or a woman or what have you. And as soon as so even if you just use only the words man and woman, and if it's a social concept, you have billions and billions, trillions and trillions combinations of people who then, and then you start adding words to that. So this doesn't work. So you can also say it's a psychological concept. How do I feel about it? Fortunately, I have only done myself to consider. Or I can say it's a biological concept, gender, which makes sense as well, because then you would have determined, I think, about 99% of people. And then for 1%, you may have some doubts. But that's not what I'm going for. What I'm going for is the love of the body.
Yes.
Any ideology that tells me that I should hate my body, and in puberty you do hate your body. I hated the fact that I had flappy ears like this. Okay, so there are a lot of sentiments in puberty that make you hate your body, the way that's developing, that's growing hair, places that there was no hair before, that is forcing you to be restrictive. So you're like stem cells, you can be both male and female when you're a little child, but then all of a sudden you get these external concepts, and then you have to behave in certain ways, and people look at you in certain ways, and you feel threatened, of course, because you have to find your identity. And the identity must be found in your restrictions, because we're human beings. We are, in Plato's terms, or in Irenaeus' terms, we are these measured beings. We are part of our restrictions define who we are. And if I want to think that I can change those restrictions, and I can to a certain extent, but I'm basically fooling myself, because the most important restrictions I can't change. I can't change when I was born. I can't change where I live, where I was born. Maybe where I live, I can change a little bit. There's so many things that I need to learn to accept. And then it's the learning to accept that is part of becoming adult human beings. So I would be afraid with any kind of ideology that teaches you to hate your body.
Yeah.
Having said that,
I totally agree with that.
Having said that, I do acknowledge that for some people, the dysphoria can be that big that you may want sometimes to consider drastic measures. But I would be careful to start that too early, because I think the psychological and the social measures need to be taken first before you start messing around with someone's body.
Yeah. Yeah,
that's my concern. Sorry, yes.
No, I understand. I think the ideology in symbolic language is multiplicity without any unity, or the subjective without the objective. Let's say that it's all it's connected to this type of language of my truth and my identity. It's all mine, and it's sadly self-centered, which is a reaction to. I think it's a reaction to a time where people felt like they were a subject of the society, let's say. So they had to fit in such narrow patterns that this is like a screaming out of like, no, but what about me? But then the me turns into a demon. And that's, I think, kind of where we are.
Yeah, because
that's what I said also with,
the me has to create its own constraints, because it doesn't have any constraints any longer.
Yeah, exactly.
And as you said, I mean, you said discipline is freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Constraints are freedom.
Yes.
And so if it's this paradox that people don't want to accept any constraints, but in a sense they are more unfree than ever because they are constrained to their own volitions.
Yeah,
and they can't make any sense of their own volitions without externalizing something or theorizing something transcendental. So you have to, as you said, you have to go outwards to, not be depressive. You have to put yourself into the position of someone else and how they see things to
Yes.
realize your own position.
Yes.
But if you don't have those constraints, that's the last thing that you're going to do,
Yeah.
because your view is narrowed to only your perspective. And this is the strength of the idea of distributed cognition.
Mm.
And so in a sense, this solipsist notion that's currently taking place in the cultural discussion, it's self-defeating. It's what Peugeot would describe as parasitic storytelling. It has to eat itself up in the long run.
Yeah.
Yeah, but be careful now. Be careful now. We don't want to go back into a situation that people who are struggling with their gender identity have no freedom anymore
Yeah,
to choose
absolutely.
or
I
to
agree.
express
I
themselves.
agree.
I think that is part of the fact that you are able to think about it and come to a determination helps you also to accept its restrictions. Because even if you have grown up like as a teenage boy, you may be like 6 feet something. That won't change whatever you do, and you still need to accept a lot of restrictions. And it's this learning to think in restrictions and to how to love them for what they are. That that is, I think, the healing part. And whether or not someone wants to embellish their body or maybe even
Mm.
cross dress or have gender changing or affirming, they have to say these days, surgery. I mean, if you can do that from a point of strength where you have accepted your limitations, I think you can, in the end, be at peace with it. If you do it like because it's a bubble and it drives you towards certain steps, and you're getting a lot of affirmation. I don't like the word affirmation here because I think it's dangerous. I think you should actually allow people some time to really find out where they stand themselves. Then you may afterwards regret the things that happened to you, and then you may feel a victim again of what came over you. So I think we're in a crucial moment in time that we first have people to learn, have to teach people how to love their body, their eros, their incarnation again, and then we can leave it up to them what kind of choices follow from there. But I think we should first go to a healthy place where you love who you are, and you experience that you may be who you are, whatever that is, whether you're a very female boy or a very male girl. That doesn't matter. You are who you are. You don't have to
Yeah.
stereotype
Yeah.
the genders
Yeah.
and then conform to something.
So the phenomena that you're currently talking about, the root they seem to have is, as you said, a hate for the body. That discussion seems to be as old as philosophy itself.
Yes,
But it's been
unfortunately.
amplified. And the question is, at which point in our recent past has it been amplified to such a point where we're at right now? And I would guess that someone like Mary Harrington would probably say that the introduction of the pill was the first cyborgization of humanity, and had huge consequences of basically saying, if you don't like the body and the way it acts, you have a technology at hand to mitigate that problem. And since
Yes,
then, the
but
technology has been, taking off in all different sorts of directions that actually increases the likelihood that someone is quite happy with his hate for the body because he can do something about it, whatever
yeah,
that may
you get
be.
a diagnosis and you can act upon it. So at least gives you some idea of agency.
Yeah.
But I don't agree that it's the pill. Um, that may be for its current manifestation. But the way that I talked about the flagellation of the body, if people
Much
had to
older.
go into celibacy, and
Yeah.
that's centuries old. The way that you had certain cults, the Kabeli cult in antiquity, where people would castrate themselves. Um, I mean, this is ancient. The fact is that we have to teach people to love their body. And Christianity hasn't got a very good track record in loving your body.
Now, if you think about some of the saints, the pillar saints, I mean, that if you're really into them I think they have a terrifyingly bad theology of the body.
Oh,
And even the more recent, some of the more recent saints, I just finished They Flew by Carlos Air, and you have the Catherine of Siena and all those more recent saints that in there. Some of them did extreme forms of flagellation, and you think like how is that um, appropriate for all the immense depth of theology of the body in the Old Testament?
yeah.
And there seems to be kind of breaking point or tipping point in Christian theology that turned the body into something dirty. And I was
Yes.
always like, wait, I thought the body was something beautiful because otherwise God wouldn't have said, and it was very good.
Hmm.
At which point do I have to come to believe that it's otherwise? And I have to commend my dad for that because he always said, you have a body and your body is something beautiful. The question
Yeah.
is what you do with that body that might make it ugly.
Hmm.
And that is, I mean, one of the most perfect uh, messages that I could receive as a boy from a father. That sets the stage already, I think, in the right direction. Now,
Hmm.
what I made of that and what I make of it today, that's a different, different sort of question. But um, and so I'm always disheartened by the fact that most Christians seem to have bought into a kind of dualism that makes the body the bad part and the soul the good part. And so if you're ill and you have sicknesses, well, that's obvious because the body is a bad thing and that happens to the body. But at least when you die, your soul turns to something else. And I've always felt that that is incomplete for me.
It's
It
utter
makes me feel
hubris.
incomplete in my whole life experience. And so
Yeah.
I don't agree with that.
No, I think it's utter hubris, Stefan. I think Jonathan Haidt said it correctly when he had this metaphor of the driver and the elephant. The driver being the mind, and the elephant being, well, say, your emotional system. And I think it's stacked. It's three parts. So you first start with your reptile body or eros, but of course it has to be corrected in order to function in a social setting. So that's why we developed the goodness, and then we're back to our. We started with beauty, then beauty also had to be good, and then we got a mind because we course correct our social impulses, because the human being has this special gift of creating its habitat. And that's wonderful that we can do that. And that's how this species was able to multiply and to spread all across the world. But so we then course correct our social impulses. But the engine room is the eros, is the libido, is the love of and for the body. And then say the first corrector is the emotional system, and the second corrector is our intelligence. But sometimes we sort of get detached from the fact that if we want to move forward, the rider has to sit on an elephant. If he wants to be productive, he has to have the elephant. If the body is not taken care of properly, if the body doesn't enjoy itself, if the body is not in good shape, I could take a lot of example from Lucas's practices to better take care of my body. But if it is your engine, it is the first level of activity. So we really need to start loving it, because this is how we were formed, and we have to acknowledge in some humbleness that our mind is only meant to course correct our impulses, and our impulses are only social impulses are only meant to course correct our bodily impulses. And then going back to Stoicism, why did it run into the church so early? Because it moved into this Greek environment
Uh,
where the passions were a risk for your soul.
I think it's actually a really good message, but I think some people, when they hear it, will take it the wrong way to love your body, because people conflate love with compassion. And so um, it will turn into a body positivity type of thing. Whereas love is such a, um, to love your body means to have judgment and mercy for it, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so it's not just like, look in the mirror and be happy no matter what you see, or no matter how you feel, or no matter what's going on in your organs or whatever. it's like providing it with good things. So
Yes.
Yeah.
good
Treat your
exercise,
treat
good
your
sleep.
body like you would treat someone that you're responsible for.
Yeah,
One of the
exactly.
Jordan Peterson rules, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
with your
Yeah.
body what is meaningful, not what is expedient. That's the
yes,
second thing. It's like you can do a lot with your body and you can talk yourself into arguing that it's good,
yes,
Mm.
but it will turn into a misalignment of your soul.
yeah.
Wow. Hey guys, I need to step out
Yes.
soon.
We can have finishing thoughts if you have any, or we can close it now. Either of you want to speak before we finish?
Oh, I just have to thank you for organizing this again and for Bas being so proficient in everything he
Yeah,
says and being so deep and meaningful for me that I'm definitely going to re-listen to this several times because I felt several mosaic pieces falling into the right place with this conversation, and it makes me really excited because I feel like, okay, this is getting me closer to understanding myself more, especially when it comes to all the topics that we've been talking about right now. So that's been wonderful. Thanks so much.
beautiful. Bas?
Well, thank you guys that I can be part of this. I mean, this is Stephan is a little bit intergenerational between the two of us. I mean, Stephan, you've got kids. You know what? You've closed the triangle. And well, it's beautiful how you talk about this friend of yours, how you talk with your wife about how to provide a place for her, how you start. We're not just talking about the big ideas anymore. We're talking about living a good life together.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and I'm very happy that Lucas allows us to be part of that, and that he has got something to teach, as I said, to me, in taking proper care of my body, and the way that he commits to Julie, that is so beautiful. So yes, thank you all,
Thank
and
you.
then
I'll
I
finish
need to
with
go.
saying that I'm honored and feel privileged to be able to speak to you, both of you. It's like having, you know, like some people they idolize sports athletes, rock stars, and stuff. But this podcast kind of got started in a way for me to like speak to my heroes. And though I know you both personally, like I both have you up there as well, intellectually, and now to have the personal as well, it's extremely special. So, uh, like honestly, like it's really an honor for both of you, and it's nice to see you again, Stefan. You I see a bit more often, so I always have access to that. But yeah, excited to
You're
speak
you
to
had
you.
a big advantage with that.
Yes, true, absolutely.
I wish he was closer to my place.
Yeah, that would be awesome. But we'll see each other,
Okay.
and thank you so much for your time, both of you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Have a good night.